So, well, not many insights because it's just from this Thursday that we are allowed to open again. So after the escalating from the fifth COVID wave, and the government has also decided to allow the opening because we had a lot of problems with binge drinking and what we call botellones in Spain.
Yeah.
So it's also part of the reason that they decided to say, okay, now from Thursday you can open, but with some conditions, as usually. And this package of conditions is being carried out in the rest of Europe for some months now. So I don't see the point in deciding that so late. It's nothing that it's impossible. It's just about asking the COVID pass, so people have to be vaccinated, they have to have overcome the disease, or they have to show a negative test at entrance.
Okay, all right. Well,
That's been going on in many countries in Europe, so we are kind of late in that aspect. So they'll be opening at the 70% of capacity. So some big venues have decided to just wait a little bit more and see how's this first weekend going on. Then you have to be wearing a mask in the place inside because they are opening the indoor spaces. Some of the outdoor were already allowed. So now, and from that, you cannot drink on the dance floor. So you have to go to the bar area. And the timetables will be pre-pandemic, from until 5 during the week until 5 in the morning, and then at the weekends it will be 6. That's for big clubs. And then we will have late bars, which have been opening all this time with a short lived. Sometimes they closed again and they open again, and that was kind of not serious at all. And nobody is like really 100% relying on this is going to work out this time. And they'll be open until 2:30 or 3 in the weekends. How this has been welcomed? Well, there are some doubts about how is this going to work, because some venues haven't even got the application or the system to scan the COVID passes. They haven't got enough staff because there's been a lot of workers who have left the industry all this time. They have been on the dole. They have been on waiting, like we call ERTOs, so with subsidies. And after so many days suffering, that's like 535 days that venues have not been allowed to really open. Some people decided just to change career. And that means that now there's a lack of workers in the industry, so they have to employ more people. They will have to fill in the fridges, they will have to clean up the space. So it's a lot to do, and I understand that they are not 100% sure that the government is not taking some step backwards. Or let's see what's going on. The loss is really, really, really big. It's like 6,000 million 32 euros. Since I think it's up to the first days of October. So that means 18 months without opening and 535 days, as I said before, with some short-lived chances they had during the summer and last year, but it didn't work out, and people are just fed up. Some young people, they have even forgot that clubs exist. They haven't had the chance to set foot in one of them. Many of them cannot afford to go out for the whole weekend. That's why they take this new way of having fun and meeting their friends, which is gathering on the beach or in plazas. Just 2 weeks ago, there's La Fiesta de la Merced, that's the big city party. And there were 40,000 young people in a square with violence, binge drinking. So that's a problem. And maybe the opening of the clubs can have part of the solution. So let's see. But I totally understand young people. I mean, they have no chances. There's not a quality leisure offer apart from this one that I mentioned. The prices in clubs, the entrances are not pre-COVID in any way. So they are much more expensive because the capacity has been reduced. So they have to make for the numbers. And also they have to there's pre-sale. So you already have to prepare to plan before the weekend. So it's a little bit, let's see, one finger crossed that everything is going out in a way that we all want to dance. I want to dance. I'm a club goer, and let's see. I will see this weekend how is that going to be. I don't know how is it in other countries now, apart from Germany that I know very well. And I was a weekend ago, I was in Belfast in a festival. The festivals were normal, like full capacity. We asked for COVID pass as well. I think the clubs, the indoor clubs were not open. In England, I guess they are. So let's see what's going on.
Okay, perhaps we can come back to this more generally after we've heard from the other three papers. So hopefully you'll be, we can have a broader discussion about clubbing post-pandemic. I can see that there are already some comments coming in the chat session as well. So how about we move on then to our first speaker. If I can introduce then Giacomo Bottà from the University of Helsinki, who is discussing underground parties and sustainable nights in Helsinki, Finland. So if I can pass over to you, are you able, do you have some slides? Would you like to put them up? Okay, great. And if we can keep the talk to around about 15 minutes, and then we'll have a lengthy discussion at the end. And of course, we'll hopefully finish just after 1, so we have time for lunch as well. All right, so I'll pass over first to Giacomo Bottà.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'm very happy to participate in this session and in this conference. So my paper, Underground Parties, Sustainable Nights, like the theme is actually, the subject of my presentation is very similar to the one I presented last year, but the perspective is completely different. Last autumn, I was describing what had happened in the summer of 2020, basically without any critical insight. While this year, I hope to be able to explain a bit better what happened and to frame it within a possible trajectory that we are currently seeing happening. In many ways, last year, my talk was very much born to an idea of exceptionality, that like it was something which had happened, which was absolutely exceptional. But this year, I'm much more into trying to find out and to tell you that there was basically nothing exceptional. So I will talk about Helsinki, Finland. Helsinki is the capital of the country, 650,000 inhabitants in a metropolitan area and in a region which covers like 1,200,000 people. I'm interested in examining the summer of 2020 when in the absence of everything else, basically the so-called UG parties. UG is like, Finnish for UG, which is like a shortening, an acronym for underground. My main question is if these parties were sustainable, what does sustainability means in the context of this party? From the point of view of the methods, if I can say a couple of things, well, I haven't been partying in the underground much myself. First of all, because I was scared of getting corona, and second, because I'm too old, and third, because I was afraid to meet students. But I've been to illegal parties before in my life in Helsinki, and I've been fairly a fairly good participant to basically underground life of Helsinki since 2004. The scene is relatively tiny in comparison to other capitals. Anyway, I collected qualitative interviews with organizers, with DJs, and with participants. And of course, I carried out a sort of media analysis, both online and offline, and both in underground channels and in official media like newspapers, for example, and so on. So just to give you an idea, the pandemic in 2020 in Finland has been nothing special in terms of infections. We had like a very small first wave and then a bigger second wave. But 2021 has been much worse than 2020 in terms of infections. Mm-hmm. But as you can see clearly, the summer of 2020, around July, we had basically nearly 0 cases for quite a stretch of time. From the legislative point of view, in the beginning, they acted the Emergency Power Act. The whole the whole Helsinki region was sealed out for several weeks from the rest of the countries. There were bans on public gatherings. There was remote teaching, and of course, clubs, restaurants were closed. But the summer, despite everything being shut down, was a moment of a kind of relaxation. Of course, if we look at a bigger perspective, we see that before Corona, and here I agree very much with what Ben wrote here in an article. So where many nightclubs already inhabited a precarious position in gentrified, financialized urban space, the pandemic has served to emphasize clubs' culture, existence, fragility. So I think this is quite interesting and very important for my paper, that like the fragility of clubbing was there before the pandemic. And to make the Helsinki example more a bit clearer, in 2019, 3 very important clubs in the city center had shut down in connection to noise disturbance on one hand, financialization of the city center, rising rents, and elements like that. So there's a lot which was happening before the pandemic itself. So we cannot frame what has happened in the summer of 2020 only with the idea that it happened because of the pandemic. And what has happened exactly? Well, there has been a proliferation of these UG parties, which were outdoor parties every weekend in the summer between more or less mid-June to mid-August. They were taking place in urban forests. Helsinki is a very, very green city, as you can imagine. Shorelines and areas are under construction. There's a lot of post-industrial spaces along the shore, or former shipyard, so is being redeveloped. They were free festivals, free spaces, I said underground, but we cannot define them as the so-called plague raves or technivals, which were taking place elsewhere in Europe. First of all, these were smaller in size. There were parties which lasted from the late afternoon, sometimes through the whole night, sometimes a bit less, but they weren't lasting over several days. And most important, they were urban parties. They were not rural. So they were so this party took place and worked through social media, and it's very interesting because depending on the parties and depending on the audience they wanted to use, they were using a different social media. So someone told me that they were using Facebook because they didn't want teenagers and wild people in their parties. They just wanted the older generation, which is still looking at invites on Facebook. Word of mouth was also very important, or like better put it, like messaging with each other. And of course sonic exploration. It's very interesting because many people knew more or less that okay, there's this area where there's going to be a party, and then someone was going there just by listening to where the bass drum was coming from and just following the sound, and then they ended up in a completely different party than the one they were expecting to go to. So there was this idea that there were sometimes in the same area there were several parties taking place. But in general, there was quite interesting attention, at least from the point of view of the organizers, towards health guidelines, safety, respect, learning, and the idea of no profit. So the only thing that there was like maybe a telephone number where people could upload money through some of these money apps and so on. And they can be identified by some kind of joyful feel here, like an informant was telling me what an incredible feeling it was, like this kind of relief from all the corona. It felt special. It's outdoor. You felt better to go there in comparison to an inside venue, but it felt like the end of corona altogether. Of course, that didn't end so well, because I'm still talking about 2020. But the idea of sustainability, why I want to bring it in. Well, these parties were definitely a reaction to the lockdown, to the pandemic measures, to the so-called pandemic effect. But they also find themselves in a sort of genealogy of the Finnish underground, connected to urban through summer festivals on one hand, which are traditionally taking place all over the country, and of course to the late 1980s, early 1990s raves and house parties. So that there are some genealogies in terms of participant, of organizers, of expertises, which you find there. So there is this kind of genealogy. Of course, there is a strong connection with some kind of top-down liberalization in Helsinki. So we're talking here local cultural policies from more or less from 2010, where you had like a wave of like local activism, which happened also in concomitance to a wave of gentrification or of densification of certain districts, and also in connection with this renewal of former industrial spaces and shorelines. So there is something there, of course, which we can see at the bottom of what happened in the summer. There's also a group of music enthusiasts, of techno enthusiasts, who were like, okay, we want to like push forward the idea that we are here only for the music. So there's also like a movement which was going against mainstream clubbing. Mainstream clubbing meaning like, techno clubs which had gone so big that like people started to go there to party and not really to like, feel the music, so to say. So there is this kind of attitude, which on one hand is based on exclusivity. So like people wanted to create something else than the normal clubbing experience. But there was also, in some people, there was also this idea of democratizing culture, meaning that like, okay, we are now curating like a kind of techno party with very interesting music, and we are doing it for free in a place which is accessible by everybody and where everybody should feel welcome. So there were like these two kind of discourses always, not conflicting by completing each other in the interviews I took. And then, of course, there was also this idea of kind of politicization of the night. So you have people who are very much concerned about ecology, concerned about the idea of safe spaces. There are subaltern minorities who wants to basically do their own stuff. And there's all this new kind of woke attitude in a lot of people where they were saying that, okay, through techno, we just want to push some kind of ideas through to people. And that is something which is not possible in the context of the club, because a club is based on queuing, is based on licensing, is based on showing IDs, is based on door selection, and so on and so on and so on. So what's next? It's hard to say. Of course, the back to normal, it's probably not happening yet, whatever it will mean. There has been this experience which happened in 2020, was repeated and sort of boosted in the summer of 2021, was an opportunity to disengage the night from profit making, from the idea of constant growth, and from the logics of the nighttime economy, and to promote solutions which were sustainable, or which tried to be sustainable in ecological, in social, and in economic and in cultural kind of point of view. It's quite interesting that everything of what this was happening outdoor. So there's this porosity of public and private that you experience when you are outdoor dancing. And there's also this porosity between exclusivity and inclusivity that I tried to describe before, with this idea of, getting away from the clubs and being devoted to the bass drum only, and at the same time trying to teach people how to behave in the context of an electronic music event. At the same time, of course, Helsinki partly developed a night governance thanks to a night liaison pilot, who was very important, I think, in establishing a contact between the underground party organizers and the city. And in 2021, we saw, for example, a kind of private-public collaboration in place making, where a club was given a city land to develop their own underground party. So what's next? I don't know. So basically that was my short answer. But thank you. And I hope I did it in 15 minutes. I did. Very good. Okay. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really informative. And again, I think we're going to come back to a lot of the issues that you raise in the discussion. So we'll have the questions at the end. So if you have any questions for Giacomo Bottà, please put them in the chat or write them down so that we can come back to them a little bit later. I'd like to now then turn to Mariko Ikeda and Christian Morgner, who I don't know if Christian's here, but I think definitely we have Mariko here. So if I pass over to you then, and your paper is titled Rearticulating Place and Virtual Space, an exploratory netnographical case study on hybrid music streaming, Cercle.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would like to share my desktop. Can you see my slides?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So as I have just been introduced, my name is Mariko Ikeda, and I'm a Japanese human and urban geographer, and I did personally do a research on socioeconomic urban transformation, including gentrification in Berlin. And also my focus is more on to the cultural sculpting movement and so on since 1989 in Berlin. I and Christian have been participating in this conference since the previous year, and in the meantime, we are continuing our online survey of the music industry affected by COVID-19. And today's presentation is based on a part of both online and field survey. So this is an overview of these presentations, and I'd like to move on to the others. Okay, now if we look at the trends in night studies in general, we will see that they have been on the increase since 2010. On the other hand, the rise of night studies coincides with the period of COVID-19 spread, as this online conference does. We conducted an online survey to stakeholders in the music industries, including artists, between June and November 2020. And the results of this online survey varied by region to region, depending on the status of the coronavirus and on national and regional measures. In Asia, for example, an electoral club in Shenzhen, China, has been also reopened since June 2020, and 1 month later in Japan, which was closed during the declaration of the state of emergency during that time, has been already reopened 1 year ago under certain conditions. And in contrast, in the UK and Germany, the lockdown has led to the closure of all food and drink establishments, not only clubs nor live venues. This has also led to an increase in temporary outdoor festivals, including a very closed outdoor late party in Berlin, and also in abandoned buildings. And also in Japan, music festivals illegally open have been also held very secretly as well, mainly in natural areas. Music-related clubs, live music venues, and other facilities tends to be concentrated in very large cities. But on the other hand, due to the intangible and immaterial characteristic of music, these facilities in residential areas are soundproofed and very close with a high degree of sound insulation, which is extremely difficult in these situations of COVID-19, where air circulation is necessary. And in Berlin, due to the restructuring of the city from the 2000s onwards, a bottom-up club association has been formed, which has led to club lobbying to the politicians and also social debate, as well as a self-help solution during COVID-19 through the United We Stream, which uses also online streaming. In addition, the club association has been also enabled to help itself by crowdfunding. The other pandemic background concerns the changes in music streaming services. Looking at the changes in music goods and services and the ways in which they are consumed, we can see that prior to the Berlin's case, online came to be the platform mainly for club music users. This chart summarizes the changes in music goods, services, and consumption ways that led to music streaming services. The major change was a shift from analog to digital in general, largely related to the spread of the internet in the global north in the 1990s. Among the digital changes, the late 2000s saw the proliferations of subscription-based services such as Spotify and Deezer, which allow users to possess music without purchasing it. As pointed out already in previous studies, the change in the way of owning music has led to a tendency to return to analog music goods, such as records and CDs, while services such as curated music channels have become more diverse. Noted that IFPI 2021 reports that revenue from paid subscriptions alone grew by 20% in the last year during pandemic, and by 20% to reach 13 billion when advertising support will be included. This accounted for 60% of global music sales, complementing a 5% decline in physical sales and 10% decline in performance rights revenue. Other reports suggest also that video content has been streamed more than audio content in the United States. The use of these immaterial properties of music to share and add value to goods on the internet had already started in 2000, especially for club music, including electro music. and Discog, MySpace, and SoundCloud, which are also used as platforms for artists to present their work, were the forerunners of streaming services in the late 2000s. In the midst of these changes in music consumption, the way in which music is performed has also changed. In particular, the rise of CDJs in 2000 and digital DJs in 2010 in clubs and music bars where DJs and VJs play a central role has led to the production of music in electronic formats and the use of video sharing platforms such as YouTube to broadcast their performances live to the world at the same time as they were performed in specific location. In particular, electro music, such as techno music, is a genre of the music that can be viewed as a performance due to the characteristic of the music, for instance, length of one song, or mixture of remixes and original songs, etc., and niche consumption styles. As mentioned in the previous slide, while the changing nature of music consumption and the increasing demand for visual as well as auditive music streaming, it is necessary to consider what the characteristic of these online streaming music performances are. So the aim of this paper is to examine the characteristic of online performances in terms of place and space based on a total of 138 videos retrieved from YouTube from Cercle, a hybrid music event developed in Paris, in France, from 2016 to the present. And netnography is a method of online research presented in the field of ethnography as introduced by Kozinets 1997. And it is a method that used Twitters and unintentional online conversations that are quite open to the public as data. In this study, this perspective was also applied to collect information from online information accessible to everyone and to conduct this descriptive and a textual analysis, and also information obtained from formal interviews in Hakuba village, Nagano prefecture in Japan, one of the Cercle host regions, has also been used to supplement the interpretation. Okay, now first of all, some basic information about Cercle. Cercle is a YouTube live stream media found in Paris in 2016. In particular, the founder, Derek Balboa, who holds a master's degrees in film and video from the Panthéon-Sorbonne University. At the beginning of 2016, he started to stream from his home using YouTube Live, but since then, he has filmed 138 videos at tourist attraction in Paris and World Heritage Site in French, and so on, but also all over the world. It has a 2.21 million registered users on its YouTube channel. As of 2020, it is run by a full-time staff of 10, with 80% of its income coming from show tickets and bar sales. And in recent years, it has received support from location management organizations and also the Ministry of Culture or the Ministry of Tourism in each country, sometimes because of its a very high economic impact of this video. In addition to YouTube, they have also an application or a homepage and Facebook and Instagram account where Cercle mentions that they are very particular about the choice of location. The reason for this is that in the normal online streaming of electronic music, location information is not so much important. For example, the pioneering channel Boiler Room, which has been established in 2010, makes location information totally anonymous. Cercle, by contrast, pays attention not only to location, region, space, and time, but also to aerial photography, lighting, and backgrounds, so that it is not only oral but also visual. Next, some basic information. There are two types of video, live and DJ set. The former are often unattended, while the latter are more likely a party. Of the total number of videos, 120, which is 80% of all, was with an audience. And of the total, 62% were DJ sets and 38% were live. At the end of the video, the artist or DJ is interviewed. This is also a feature of Cercle. This element, in addition to the choice of locations, adds value and uniqueness to the video content. And in terms of the duration of each video, the shortest one was 44 minutes, and the longest one is 2 hours, 13 minutes. Since some of the live performances were relatively long, there was no particular trend according to the type of music performance. In terms of the number of views, the smallest was 427 and the largest was over 30 million. And the smallest number of comments was 11 and the largest was over 10,000. The use of drones for aerial photography was used in 60 cases, so 1/3. Now the characteristic of time of day and location. The figure on the left shows the time of day, with nighttime accounting for less than 30% of the total, and daytime and evening accounting for 60%. This is related to the fact that, as was the case even before the COVID-19, but also the COVID-19 triggered an increase in outdoor streaming, especially in natural areas. In natural areas, it is difficult to capture images at night or during nighttime, and with exceptions of the latest videos shown in the front side, most of the streaming takes place in the afternoon to the early evening, and which was also understood by the angle of the setting sun. Related to this, the characteristic of the location shows that about 36% of the videos were shooted indoors, where nearly 70% of the videos were shooted outdoors. Also, the characteristic of the places where they were used were also analyzed in the data in detail. Each color represents a type of space, and the size of the area indicates a number. For example, brown represents historic buildings, including World Heritage sites, and green represents public spaces, and blue represents cultural facilities. It can be seen that clubs, cabarets, record shop, etc., which were used in the early days of the Cercle, do not represent a particularly high percentage of the total, but rather, as shown on the website, historical buildings and spaces that are not usually used as music venues have been carefully selected. Next are the characteristics of the regions. This figure on the left shows the number of filmed videos per region. As I mentioned earlier, Cercle is based in Paris, so Western Europe, with France as an example accounts for 74% of the total. The next largest group is North America, with Mexico is 4 and the USA for 3. Looking at the composition, France is the highest in Western Europe, while Spain, including Ibiza or islands such as Malta, are also high. Also looking at the characteristic by period, the first 42 videos were actually located or shooted in France. In 2018, 2 years after its foundation, it started filming outside France, in Switzerland, the UK, USA, and Sweden. And according to the interview, it is very difficult to bring in the equipment when filming outside France, so they ask the crew in each country to support them. Now, finally, I would like to mention the intention of video producers. As already mentioned, audio is the main commodity in music streaming services, but Cercle's uniqueness is lying in the setting of background of its videos. More precisely, the location and the integration of location and music selection. This uniqueness has been mentioned in the lifestyle online magazine Wired and can be understood from the dialogue interviews below. In music streaming, they usually focus on the selection of artists such as underground artists who are usually difficult to book, as opposed to music streaming applications such as Spotify, creating and recommending music to suit individual tastes. However, Cercle pays more attention to the visual nature of the content, stating that the choice of location is more important than the artist. The dialogue at the bottom of the slide suggests that this is partly due to a sense of differentiation from boiler room and color. The number of registered users is 4.75, by the way, million for colors and 2.75 million for boiler room, while Cercle is 2.21 million, so it is a similar size. This result is new to related to previous research in 3 ways. Although it has already been mentioned that music streaming media is eventalized, it has shown that visual information such as the background along with the audio information may have a certain importance in the content. In particular, drone-enhanced images filmed from around the world, including World Heritage Sites, combined with the corresponding music, creates a high, unique hybrid experiences as that's the time spent interviewed to each artist, which is unique to Cercle. And these moments of humanity, or maybe a quiet time or very strange pause during the video, as well as the artist interviews, which is characterizing Cercle, maintain a certain humanity in contrast to the music content, which is curated based on market prediction or customized by AI. This, I thought, might be a kind of hint for a post-COVID-19 society. And as a future subject, I will make a supplementary presentation focusing on the following data that I could not present this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was really, really informative. I actually asked a question in the panel yesterday about music and space and all that, and that completely answered everything that I was curious about. So that was great. That was really, really interesting. Should we move on then? And again, we'll keep our comments, and also Angela is on her way out. So we'll say thank you again to Angela, and Angela's also put her email in the chat if anyone would like to catch up with Angela a bit further as well. Thank you again for another really great paper. Let's move on then to Christine Preiser. And Christine is at the University Hospital in Tübingen and is talking about the joys and shadows of working at night, insights from an ethnography about bouncers in German nightclubs. So we'll move to Christine, and I can see your slides. And again, we'll leave it at about 15 minutes, and then that will give us plenty of time for a discussion later. Christine, I can't hear you. Is your mic on?
No, it's fine. I'm sorry. I was 1.5 years in the pandemic, and I'm still struggling with technology. So thank you for the opportunity to present here. It's been a while since I've been talking about the nights. And I'm excited to do so now at daytime. I'm going to talk about a very infamous and famous protagonist of the night, which is bouncers. And as you can see on the right side, even Pope Francis, the current Pope, has been a bouncer in the late 60s. So you never know who you're meeting on the door. I will, as Adam already said, I'm working now in the occupational health department of a university clinic. So this also informs my talk today, where I'm merging my insights from my sociological perspective in my ethnographic field work and the occupational health perspective. And we will also be time traveling, because we are traveling to a time that is before the COVID-19 pandemic, when we were still not thinking of something like this to happen. So if we look at occupational health and occupational medicine perspective, and also legislations, there's a lot of fields that kind of touch the work of bouncers, actually, because night work, for example, and shift work has been highly discussed and regulated topics in the field of occupational health and medicine for a long time, for decades. And there's, at least in Germany, there's quite some regulations about it, that in many sectors, for example, go along with restricted times, how long to work in night shifts per week, or also regarding payment. A lot of working class people also been building up on being paid more at night, and thus being driven into the night for work. From the occupational health perspective, though, the part of the informalized work that also affects bouncers in a lot of cases with kind of sometimes shady work contracts or non-existing work contracts or half official work and so on, as it is the case in some parts of the work field. It's not so much addressed in the field of occupational health and medicine, because that one mostly focuses on the existence of occupational health measures and not on their absence, especially not in the night. So there's a bit the background, how I'm looking at it today. And I will connect this to insights from my ethnographic field research that I have been doing through my PhD in the time frame from 2013 till 2018. So very much pre-pandemic. The main focus of my ethnographic fieldwork was being part of bouncer teams in 3 nightclubs in 2 German cities. I was not working as a bouncer myself, but I was part of the team, not as a colleague, but as a kind of weirdo researcher. I don't know what kind of role you always have in the teams, but as somebody who they knew is doing research on their work, on who they very nicely integrated into their nightly routines. And it was 3 different kind of music venues that I chose. One was a techno club, one was a punk rock, gothic music, and one was focusing on hip hop and dancehall and Afrobeats. That was the main focus of my work, but I was also analyzing over years the documents, Google reviews, Twitter, and so on, doing a lot of illustrations also, because I was not allowed to take any form of digital data on site, no photos, no videos, and no audio recordings. So we have been, in the past 2 years, we have been talking about a lot about the questions of unskilled labor, which is a term that I usually would try to avoid because I find highly problematic, but I chose to use here in quotation marks because it is actually the unskilled part is something that is used a lot also to stigmatize bouncers in their work. But if you look at it, what is kind of the pillars of their work and their expertise, even though it might be a labor that is not going through a professional and formalized training, it requires a lot of training on the job while actually exercising the job. And I would focus on 5 dimensions that are super relevant in their unique expertise that they have while working the doors and working at night. And one of them is having really a trained eye and learning how to understand, like how to separate between the the common crowd and those people who kind of stand out for various reasons and that actually fall under their responsibilities, because there's hundreds of people and you can't take care of all of them. So you have to choose who's relevant and who's not, for which reason, and how to read body signs, and also how to read your colleagues' body signs and so on, and your own, to understand what is the relevance now in this current situation. Another dimension is you have to learn an authentic embodied presence that consists of how you present your own body, in the sense of how you stand, where you have your hands, how you take up space, how you make yourself invisible in some moments of your work and make yourself hyper visible in other moments of your work, independently from how your body actually looks like. I mean, when we think of bouncers in the cliche thinking, I think we all have a very common picture in mind, but the reality looks so much different because it's very heterogeneous who is actually working as a bouncer, and it's not so important to have a specific bodily build. It can help, but it's more about this authentic embodied presence that you have to live, to make sure to be sometimes very intimidating in the 1 second and hyper friendly in the other second, and kind of switch according to the appropriateness of the situation, for example. That's also part of the expertise. And another one is the reliability, which means that you're not only there for the sunny sides and the joy sides, but also there when it really gets important, when there is something big, which also includes taking risks, bodily risks, but also legal risks, and also be able to endure it. That's 3 dimensions. The 4th one is local knowledge. One bouncer once framed it that bouncers are pretty much gossip girls, and I think that's pretty accurate, because there's a lot of knowledge that is shared informally in networks about the nights, their protagonists, team members, all the informal other workers of the night, but also, of course, the guests. And you have kind of a whole network and knowledge pool that you're part of, and that you constantly have to feed in, but also have to kind of very cautiously to understand who to share which information with, and which information to keep to yourself or in a circle of the knowledge network. Which brings me to the last dimension, that you also have to find your own role in the network. There's several kinds of roles that are highly accepted and highly needed, but you have to find your own and to build up on it. And all this is learned informally from your colleagues, from mimicking others, from trial and error, and also sometimes from informal workshops, for example, informal teaching, but nothing, it's not a formalized training, other than a certain license that you can do in Germany, but it's not that relevant for the occupation. And this plays out, like the dimensions that I've mentioned, they play out in basically all main stages of the work, which is probably the most famous one, is the work at the door, deciding about access and denial of access and all the topics that go along with it. But of course, also the other dimensions, like setting and enforcing rules in the party, deciding also who is still party able and who is not, for example, and also in handling trouble of all sorts. And in this context, a lot of research and also that also aligns in my research is connected to those topics of dirty work or also edge work, and both kind of connect to like the more difficult parts or the shadow parts oftentimes of the occupation. Dirty work means that kind of the parts of the work that is exercised are stigmatized, morally stigmatized, and thus stigmatization also affects those that are exercising the work. This is oftentimes the case in bouncers when it comes to, for example, racial discrimination, racist behavior, but also enforcing rules being kind of the killjoy of the party, and also applying violence. And the edge work is more connected in the literature and also in my research to questions of pushing one's own limits and the thrill of action, for example. But what does this actually mean, like for how bouncers see their work, and what is kind of draining for their work, and what is the joys also of their work, and how do they actually handle this? So I brought you some, let's say, voices from the night and from bouncers, even though I did not conduct interviews. Of course, there was a lot of conversations also in the boring times of the night and over the time where you kind of share and kind of sometimes ask questions, or also a lot of questions are answered without ever being asked, where people actually are reflecting on their work and what they like about it and what is also difficult for them. So if we look at the dark side of the doors, we can see here, for example, that bouncers are reporting that their rhythm of work collides at night, collides with other parts of their life, sometimes because they also work at daytime, Sometimes, of course, or in a lot of cases, they're the lives of their loved ones, for example, families, friends, relationships, which sometimes leads to a situation where their main social network is mostly other nightlife workers, which they sometimes appreciate, but in a lot of cases also kind of see critical, because they feel like they're also stuck in the night, and it's difficult to leave the night again. They problematize working with masses of intoxicated people, which can sometimes lead also to kind of a fatigue of intoxication and the pleasures of others. They are speaking of police reports that are kind of daily part of their business, that leads to a lot of unpaid hours, for example, on police stations, writing protocols and so on, but especially also a lot of pressure on their mental health, because it's sometimes those cases can take years until they're officially or unofficially finished, and they keep popping up every other month. In a lot of cases, they also report that they discuss also in the teams that actually their work is pretty risky when it comes to this reliability and the edge work. A lot of potential risks arise of exercising violence, experiencing violence, and also the legal consequences of this. And they frame it as, in a lot of cases, the risks and the payments not being in proportion to each other. Also, the questions of moral stress, how it's called also in occupational health, of the fact that requirements of their work, for example, exercising denial of access and their own personal values collide, or they also see that the way how they exercise their work is actually not how they would love to do it. And also the fact of informalized work, that you only know by the end of the month how much you actually earn. So it's quite unpredictable how much income you will have built during a whole month. Interestingly, a lot of topics that are usually addressed also in occupational health, additionally to that, what I was actually talking about, are not addressed so much among bouncers. That would be, for example, working in a very loud environment, standing for many hours of the night, hardly having any breaks, bad light situations to work, high frequency of contacts, for example. That would also be very classical topics, as much as also like shift work topics and so on. But parts of those were never addressed, interesting. And I only realized myself when I started working also more in the occupational health field. But of course, there's also a lot of bouncers that, and it's mostly ambivalent, and it's kind of changing over the course of the nights and the times, that actually like the work and see a lot of joys in working the door. And here also I brought some voices, let's say, where people kept on repeating that they really enjoy working with their friends. That's the guys that they're working with at the door is actually guys that would also love to hang out with in their leisure time. Also kind of seeing their own expertise as something meaningful, not only in the sense of dealing with conflict, but mostly also seeing themselves as people who love working with other people, which you can see here, like the mirror of being like, I'm kind of a social worker, but sometimes a kindergartner, but mostly a social worker is an image that kept reappearing in how bouncers were speaking of their work and making sense of their work. A lot of them also appreciate that it's flexible work. So you have the unpredictability on the one hand, but also the flexibility on the other hand. So they said like, yeah, if I want to work more this month, I will do it. I have more shifts, and next month I want to go on holiday, so I will work less at the door and so on. It was repeatedly also addressed that bouncers enjoyed solving complex situations, not only in the sense of never knowing how it will turn out, but also complex conflict situations, trying to really make sure that people have a good time in the nightclub, which was sometimes meaning also conflicting interests of people and logics, and how to kind of balance and navigate this. Or they were saying like, yeah, I'm just good at it. That's why I also like it, because I know it's something I'm good at. Or also looking for the intensity of working at night in this kind of environment, because they kept referring to 9-to-5 jobs as something that might be more reliable, might be more secure, might have less risks, but it has also less intensity of all kinds. So how are they kind of coping with I saw your hand, Adam, thank you, I'm almost finished. How are they coping with the constraints of the night? And they have some resources that they were building on. And here the question of mutual support among each other is extremely important, and also is connected to this intensity, but also working with friends and so on. That means like having each other's backs, supporting each other at day and at night was very important, and also means fighting like the dark sides of the doors together. We have, in some cases, I also found informal help funds for questions of costs for lawyers, for example, but also sick leave, for example, or travel costs if people had long travel costs, where there was kind of forms of solidarity, financial solidarity amongst each other. Another resource is getting a good reputation as a bouncer and having opportunities to negotiate on the job market to find a better club, or sometimes also going more into the daytime of work, working less, or sometimes even leaving the night, even though a lot of bouncers were going back to the night again, because they also kind of missed the intensity and the mutual support that they were encountering in the night. So to conclude, if we come back to the beginning of the question of working at night, shift work, informalized labor, and so on, we can see that some of the pleasures and or the joys and the shadows of the night, they are really connected to the question of working in nightlife in particular, such as working with intoxicated people, for example, in very loud environment, under very unregulated conditions in the nightlife itself. But a lot of the topics, they are also connected to working at night, that kind of bridges to other professions that that are also working in the night, such as healthcare workers, facility workers, and so on, or also large parts of the car industry, for example, where we also have all those questions of colliding rhythms, for example, between the day and the night. And we also have those topics of informalized work, where people have to work in precarious situations, legally speaking, but also financially speaking, that are also connecting to other parts of the labor market that is not necessarily connected to the night itself, but to the precarity of the work situation. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to discussion and giving back to Adam.